Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Larry's Home Garden Show. Thank you for getting up early and spending your Saturday morning with us. Today is the 4th of July, American Independence Day. We hope you have a safe, happy, and wonderful holiday with your family and friends. I'm Katherine O'Neill. We'll be talking about landscaping, plants, outdoor living, and answering questions. So stay with us, enjoy the shows, and once again, happy 4th of July.
Yeah, happy 4th of July. We've got a lot of things going on downtown. You get to go downtown and watch the fireworks display. It starts at 9 o'clock at the downtown fountain. It's kind of exciting, It gets get in the spirit of things. But in the garden, as it warms up in the summer, there's a lot of things to be done, making sure the water is getting on your garden. And some things are really doing well this time of the year. And some of our native plants, our flowering trees are doing excellent, and they're flowering right now. They're starting to flower. Is Cyrilla racemosa. That's a tree that, or a small tree actually, that is basically unheard of, and it's a native tree, and it has a beautiful flowering display. It gets around, I think, around the big one would be 15 feet. That would be the biggest, and it can be cut. Grown as a short hedge or a small shrub. I think there's a dwarf variety even available to grow in a container, and it's a beautiful flowering tree midsummer. One of the great things about this native tree is if you have a wet area and nothing really grows well in that area, you could plant this tree. It likes to grow in soggy soil. Its native environment is going to be in the marshy areas, freshwater marshy areas. And there's a cultivar out there called Mississippi, and the one thing that's great about that one is if you want it evergreen, I mean, no dropping of the leaves. It's not going to be deciduous, dropping the leaves during the winter. Is that this one will do it. Now, if you buy a species, this is a cultivar. The cultivar has a unique characteristic. If you buy the species, like just a random seedling sold, they're going to lose some of their leaves in that. But when they lose their leaves, they have that beautiful, reliable fall color, oranges, reds, and yellows. So you mix this tree in there with your crepe myrtles. You could have crepe myrtles. This tree, you could have the fringe tree, you can have, Arnissa, Sylvanica, cherry pie is our native tree, and you can have great color in the landscape and very, very low maintenance. Once you get these trees established, they're going to be on their own and smooth sailing, And another great flowering tree that's native to our area and rarely ever planted a summer flower is called sourwood. And sourwood is another small tree. It's kind of an understory tree. It appreciates a little bit of afternoon shade and moisture retentive soil, but white flowers during the summer. And some of the best honey is made from sourwood. They have honey. I used to work for a lady who kept bees, and she said some of the best honey is made from sourwood. Some of the most expensive honey in the United States. So if you're a beekeeper, you plant a couple sourwood trees, and they would love that. But again, the conditions on a sourwood tree: moisture retentive soil, it could grow in the shade, and they need a little bit of water to get established. When it's warm like this, people say, well, you should maybe not plant, but you can plant if you want. It's just going to take a little bit more water. That's it. We're planting, last August we planted, a couple 3,000, 4,000 plants, and in the middle of August. Okay, so that was not an issue. We just made sure they're getting plenty of water. You got to water. A lot of the plants that we were planting are going to thrive in the heat. Tropical plants are thriving in the heat. They just need that water to get them started. And that's the only difference in planting. And this time of the year, you got to make sure they get good water, they get a good start, and then after about a week or two, give them a little bit of fertilizer, and they are off and running. And the more water you give them in the beginning, the less you'll have to, protract the process. If you're frequently watering, getting them established quickly, you're not going to have to continue to water an extra 2 weeks. So really concentrate on getting the water in there, on your plants. If you have a question on gardening, or you're starting on a gardening project, landscaping project, if your grass is not looking as green and struggling along, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. A lot of times, in sandy soil, we have difficulty in establishing our, plants because there's low nutrients, especially in grass. I've run into many different grass problems the last couple of weeks. And one of the best things that we could do right now in this time of the year is putting down organic compounds. There's no way that we can improve the cation exchange in our soil because we don't have clay. When you have clay soils, it's a natural component of clay. Clay holds the nutrients in place. But what we need to do to improve the soil, because people ask me when I go to their location, they said, well, I have low manganese, or I have potassium is low, boron's low. Is this something that I can fix permanently? Or do I have to continue to apply? Yeah, well, until the soil stabilizes, yes, you're going to have to continue to apply. But how do I fix the problem permanently? Or at least get it somewhat, under control, or where it becomes not a crucial or catastrophic event on your grass. And that is the solution to that is adding organic compounds into the soil. And so when you have clay, what happens in clay is that the clay adheres to the manganese, magnesium, copper, sulfur. It clings to those trace elements, and nitrogen. It clings to nitrogen, all those things, so that holds it in place. Irregardless if it has high water or low water, they are going to hold it in place. There is some leaching, but it is very small. Well, in sand, you have put out potassium, boron, manganese, and if your pH is a little acidic, it's going to run right out. I mean, you can put boron on your soil and on your sandy soil, and it runs right out, soon after it rains, so you're not even there. But how to mitigate that? If you have a soil problem, you realize you've done a soil test and you said your manganese is low, and it's a problem in all Florida soils. Manganese, low manganese, all Florida soils. It's just that it comes with our soil type. And by adding organic compounds, the organic compounds takes the place of the clay. And they form, the technical word is complexes. When an organic compound forms a union with a cation or a inorganic element, and these will start forming. And we take, for instance, I had a problem with, a client had a problem with their grass, St. Augustine, and the percent organic material in the soil was like 2 or 3, which is sandy soil, which is very low. You're supposed to be at 10. 10 would be the best. So over a couple year period, we were adding mill organite, fish emulsion, humic and fulvic acid, and adding those molasses, all those things in there, bacteria, and over a period of time, his soil started to hold all those trace elements. So during this time of the year, it's a good idea if you're putting down fertilizer, or if would like to put down some to improve the overall quality of the grass, putting down mill organite, molasses, and anything with organic compost, on your lawn is definitely going to improve the overall ability for the soil to hold the nutrients. And so what does that mean? That you're going to have no nutrient imbalance, or lesser nutrient imbalances, and that when you put down the fertilizer, it's going to be more efficient, it's going to hold, and you don't have to use it as much. So you and your overall quality of the grass and its disease resistant will radically improve, because we had the problem with his lawn is he had root fungus everywhere on his lawn and just couldn't even control it. So, we fungicide, more fungicide, and eventually we didn't have to use any fungicide on it, and the grass had completely recovered. So they'll put that on the list. If you've taken soil tests and your nutrient levels are out of whack and there's not, any of the things that you need, there's probably not going to be any manganese and potassium and boron. It's not going to be present. And when you're getting a soil test, people don't want to give you the full range of trace elements. You need to always remember to get those 8 essential trace elements tested, and that's manganese, boron, potassium, not potassium, copper, sulfur, molybdenum, those iron, chlorine. You need to know those are the 8 absolutely essential trace elements that you need for a plant to carry on photosynthesis. If one of those are missing, you cannot successfully carry on photosynthesis in any plant, whether it be your containers or not. And you can always add those trace elements in containers. And when you have soil that you usually buy, and that's what you're paying for when you're purchasing soil, is a higher quality of trace elements, ability to hold water, in containers. We were working in the shade zones this week, and also preparing to work in the shade zones, and we're trying to get spruce up the shady areas. The common solution is Asiatic jasmine, which they have some fantastic cultivars of Asiatic jasmine now. Well, we'll hold on to that idea for on the other side of the break. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. We'll be right back with you. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your pond, your pergola, your soil, how to make your soil great. Great soil makes great plants. People always don't know why I talk so much about maintenance. Some people ask me why I talk so much about maintenance, but a great garden, a great landscape, great grass is going to be the soil. The soil is just is so important. And I think that a lot of times people fail, just like we created an English garden and there's over 6,000 perennials, and people say, oh, that can't be done. But not necessarily. You could, if the soil is correct, if you could get the soil correct, that the plants have the ability to thrive. Not everyone, we can't bring down everything for that we like to see, we see up in Virginia or up in Massachusetts, but we can bring it down a lot of the plants, and they will thrive and grow well in our climate, if you understand that. And there's many, many undiscovered plants that we probably in that perennial garden, we probably put about at least 100 undiscovered plants that we discovered, doing well. And so far in July, they've endured heat, humidity, everything that they declared when they wrote in the description, that these plants would not grow well in our type of weather, our zone. But it's not that case. But if you have a question, you're starting on your lawn's looking a little, and you have take all root rot, and it's just you have those spots on your lawn that just seems like your lawn is getting enveloped by that disease. We can solve the problem for you. If you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045, 855-765-1045. Talking about the shade zone with all these great live oaks that we have. And that's a good thing about living in the lower southeast. They have these great live oaks, and they cast a lot of shade. Hard to grow grass in those conditions. If you're thinking about putting grass under shade, don't get Floratam. It's the worst. It is the number one lowest rating from the last article I read of grass to grow in the shade in St. Augustine. And St. Augustine is shade tolerant, but it's the worst type of St. Augustine to put in the shade. All right, but some of the great plants will really enhance the shade and not be so boring, with just Asiatic jasmine everywhere, and making the shade garden a place which is to visit this time of the year is great, where you want to be in the shade in the middle of the afternoon, and if you want to be outside, it's warm, it's summer, it's supposed to be warm, we want it to be 70 degrees, but it's summer. But heuchera is a great plant. Heuchera americana. Heuchera is another variety that will grow well in our zone, and they're heat tolerant. And Heuchera autumn bride is a beautiful perennial plant, and will sub in for Asiatic jasmine, and has a beautiful flower. And they've created a lot of crosses, with this plant, and created. So of course, these plant breeders are just doing an incredible job coming up with all different varieties. It's absolutely amazing. One day you look at a particular like Shukra, and you look at one couple years ago, I looked at how many varieties are available, and now it's just, double that amount, with the cultivars of that. And so one of the nicest ones is Citronella, which is a kind of a limey green, nice kind of a, not like a maple leaf, but a kind of a round leaf and roughly somewhat, and it creates a nice uniform ground cover when you plant them close together. And then another benefit is they have a great flower, and so does Autumn Bride. And they have some that actually have colorful leaves. If you want colorful leaves, you have bronze colorful leaves, Southern Comfort. They have Amber Waves, which is very vigorous. You want, when you're selecting, let's say if you wanted to plant heuchera instead of Asiatic jasmine, you always want to look up and get the ones that are more vigorous in our zone. That they're going to want to grow no matter, in spite of whatever the conditions. They have that genetic thing grow. Some are grow along a little slower. Those you want to kind of, not unless you're willing to put the time in and get them growing better. But you want to get something that grows vigorous, so it will fill in quickly. And heuchera, this one right here, Amber Waves, is very vigorous. So is Citronella and heuchera Autumn Bride. And you will not regret that. You want to make sure that they're used to growing under trees like live oaks. And one of the great things about them is they are deer resistant. So if you having problems with deer eating your shade plants, you want to put that on the list. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden, Landscape and Design, and we'll be right back with you more great garden talk. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden, Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your pond, your pergola, anything to do with trying to make things green and look great outside. It's that warm time of year. A great shade tree is a good place, to have something, right now to hang out underneath during the middle of the day. But it's still possible to go outside. You install a fan. I'm used to that heat. But in the shade garden, we're talking about how to have a beautiful shade garden, because you want to be in the shade this time of the year in the middle of the day, sit outside and enjoy the outdoors. We're talking about how to have a beautiful shade garden instead of just having Asiatic jasmine, which is a good plant. I'm not taking anything away from it. And they have some unbelievable cultivars now out there that are some great colors to them. But heuchera is a neglected plant that should be planted more. Hosta, of course, we do hostas. There's plenty of hosta. There's not as much to select from as Boston or Virginia, but there's plenty of hosta that will grow well in our zone, even the high heat. They have to make sure you pick from the right species. Our stained glass hostas our Sum and Substance look good. They have the sun hosta. The sun hosta is smaller leaves, but you can put it in the full sun. It will grow in the full sun. So and they have beautiful leaves. They can be lime green, variegated, large leaves. Like Sum and Substance is a huge hosta. It will get good size. And not only that, they have the great looking foliage, and they have flowers. So they have flower in low light. Hosta is another great ground cover. So you mix hosta, heuchera, you put in some Satsuki azaleas that bloom May and June, and then they rebloom in September. Then you can put digitalis, which is foxglove grandiflora, which will thrive in our temperature. I have those. I have some digitalis in our perennial bed flowers. A garden, so we plant that in the full sun, and they're thriving. If you pick the right type, we have our native columbine. Columbine is another beautiful perennial plant. Now, this is a unbelievable ground cover, but nobody even plants it, and it's called Indian pink, and it's a red and green native plant that produces flowers in the spring, and no maintenance at all. Just put it in the ground, and it will take over. And then it's not aggressive, though. It will slowly spread. And, Indian pinks. They have a variety that is endangered. That is pink color. I don't know why they call it Indian pinks when the flower is actually red and yellow, but they do have a pink variety that's native to Alabama, and that's probably where the name started. Then they saw it's in the same It's a different species, but red and yellow is a predominant color of that plant. And you would not go wrong planting that. I mean, you could be the skill that you need to plant that and grow that plant would be, on the level of about 4. It's not a very difficult plant to grow at all, and has beautiful flowers in the spring. And the Ryope Royal Purple is another great plant in the shade, low light, and it stays nice and compact. One of the things I don't like about the Ryope, all these, in the right spot, a big Ryope looks good, but it does look a little, wild, when the Ryope, because it's normally used for edging like walkways, and they have these bigger varieties. I think they need to be compact, and you pay extra for these new cultivars, but Royal Purple is still a great variety. It's an older variety of Liriope. It's getting around maybe 10 inches tall, 8 to 10 inches tall. But the unique thing about this, this is one of the predominant Liriope I use, is going to be that the flower is well above the plant. So you have your plant, leaves, and then your flower will be about 6 inches above that. And it's really dark purple. And so it really stands out. Like Liriope, the flower's inside of it. You have to really get close to see it, but from a distance, you can see Royal Purple. We have a new Liriope that we're trying out, and its flower is about 2.5 feet above the plant. So it's a really interesting Liriope where hopefully it works well in our climate. And then if you want more of a uniform ground cover like Asiatic jasmine, a juca. A juca is a completely, neglected plant in our area. And, for variety, you get Asiatic jasmine, put it aside and try a juca if you want that. But even a lower, it's really low. Asiatic jasmine, if it grows for 3 to 4 years, it's going to get that thick mat around 8 to 10 inches high, depends on the variety. And this one will stay completely low and will not need any trimming. To get it down after a while, that needs some trimming to get it in a reasonable size. And a juca is going to be not more than 2 to 3 inches off the ground. That's the maximum height. And then the plant breeders have done great things on it. And then having a flower. The flowers late spring, if you got good sun. It just depends on how much sunlight it's getting. That's if it's a little less sun, it's going to be a little slower to flower. But that's a great plant in any landscape. And the color varieties that you can get in the foliage is just without any constraint. I mean, you can get, kind of a sage green foliage with variegation on the edge, medio picta. You can get the kind of a chartreuse with bronze color. You can get chocolate color, dark chocolate, kind of actually purple. You can get a variegation in lime, kind of a lime green. I'm just going over all the colors. You can get straight green, but some of the colors on them are pretty fantastic. They have a coppery one with a copper colored one. It's called a Fancy Finch, and it has copper and yellow variegated leaves, and then with that blue flower. They actually have predominantly you're going to have blue flowers, but then you're going to have they do have some that have pink. Princess Anne is a variegated variety. Flashy is another variety with pink flowers, and then Paradise. I don't make up all these names. I would that's blue green, a juca. But they got to have these marketing names. But these are a great plant. Now, if I'm planting on the tree because we have, and I want to create a great garden in the shade, and that because I say I've got 60% shade in my landscape, and I want to create a garden which I can come out and sit in and enjoy during summer or the spring. You always want to decide what time of the year you're going to be out there the most, and you want to make it the peak of that landscape or garden at that particular time. All the plants are going to be flowering at that time or looking at the best at the time. Gardens have, they have times where they're a little out of, not as flowering as much, and then they go back into flower, and then there's some times in there, but you want to really schedule that time when you want to be out there, that you're at your peak performance. But so picking out the plants, figuring out what the blooming times on them is very important. Then you want to put out your compost. You want to have your compost or planting mix to get everything a good start. It's competitive under trees. It's really competitive. The tree is the dominant player, and under when you're trying to grow things. That's why Asiatic jasmine, azaleas, they're designed. Their root systems are shallow. They're designed to grow under trees. To be in a competitive environment, low water environment, and because a large tree is, moving 200 or 300 gallons of water through its leaf every single day during the summer. Right now, the 200 or 300 gallons is being going through that tree. In a larger tree, maybe even more. So you want to put some compost that will increase the moisture retentiveness of the soil and increase the fertility of the soil, and that will help them getting going and having perfect results. When you're deciding when to if you're doing a new landscape flower bed or a new shrub bed at your home, you decide what your results you want. It's going to be, a measurement of how much effort you want to put into the bed. If you want, to have between 8 and 10 results, you're going to have to put more effort and more inputs into that flower bed. Or change the type of plants that you're going to be limited by what plants you want to plant in pure soil, sand. But if you want between 1 and 10, if you want number 5 results, then you don't have to do too much. Draw the plant in there, put a little fertilizer on. But if you want the 8 to 10 results, you're going to have to put a little bit of compost, some fertilizer, a little bit of maybe a bacterial inoculant to get the thing looking good, and you'll get the spectacular results, and you also improve the resistance of disease. And then before you begin, you need to always evaluate the irrigation system. I know planting new plants is always a watering thing. That's always, you're going to add watering to the equation and getting it started. You don't want to be, if you can avoid, you don't want to be out there every day if you don't have to. So maybe looking at the irrigation system, if this is a place that you're setting aside that you want to use and enjoy all through the year, look at the irrigation system. And so you're not hose dragging, because the quality of the landscape is going to be dependent on how much, when we have drought, is the water, if you're meeting the watering needs, especially when we have high temperature. And you're planting new plant, you want to have the capacity to cover that area well within that time of establishment. So you can turn that zone on. Let's say if you're planting a shrub border in the front of the house, you want to turn that zone on to cover the water. You want to turn it on at least 45, 50 minutes, because you want to drop out about a couple inches a week on the landscape. Now, on larger plants, you want to make sure they get hose watered at least 2 or 3 times a week, because we got the root balls all the way on 30 gallons all the way to 2.5 feet deep. You want a little irrigation on the top is not going to really help it that much. It's going to matter, but on the larger plants, you want to make sure you hose water in these temperatures. Maybe not in the winter, you don't have to be as aggressive with the hose, but watering is one of the first things you want to think about. You want to make sure, if you're planning to build a flower bed or plant a new shrub bed border, put a couple trays, lids of any type of a can, a paper cup throughout that area, and you want to make sure that you're getting uniform amount of water. Not to say that irrigation companies aren't careful about that, but you need to take that up yourself and make sure it gets inspected before you begin planting. You have great irrigation. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we'll be right back with more great garden. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living. Happy 4th of July. Break out the fireworks and have a good time this weekend. Downtown at 9 o'clock, they're having a fireworks display at the best viewing sites are at the fountain, and a great place to be. Enjoy the 4th of July. Break out the barbecues too. Break out the barbecue. But we're talking about how to have a great shade garden and preparation for any type of landscape. Review your irrigation. That will give you 8 to 10 results. Review your soil, what kind of soil you're going to put down, and set up your watering schedule. If you're planting in the middle of the summer, which is, there's no problem planting in the middle of summer. You just need water. That's the only thing. And actually, your plants, if you give them the right water and the right fertilizer and the right soil, they're going to establish quickly. The warm weather, excluding some plants don't like like roses, and maybe they establish. They may not flower as good, but they establish. What happens a lot of times in these the high summer, and sometimes plants are lagging behind somewhat in flowering, and that's because of the temperature. And the temperature is, once the temperature hits 85, 87, the plant is really not in not all plants we're talking about, but a general cross section of plants. And once they get 85, 87, 88, the rate of photosynthesis slows way down. That's why it's important, if you want the plants or vegetable garden to continue to really do well, is to put a little bit of molasses. You've heard me talk about molasses on it. And one reason why that it really insulates the plants from the temperature is because they don't have to produce their own carbohydrates. You're just giving them the carbohydrates which they can absorb immediately and use in their system, so that the machine doesn't have to work that hard. And that's what happens on roses. They slow down blooming. I notice our English roses have slowed down a little bit, and they will slow down through the summer. But as soon as if you're putting down the fertilizer on them, your plants that are slow will rebloom and start to rebloom in the fall. So we have 2 segments. We have the spring, we have high summer, and then we have the fall. So lower southeast. So once that temperature gets below 85, everything wakes back up and starts going back into the flowering business. But in the shade, it's a different situation. Some plants thrive in the shade in the lower southeast. And we went through heuchera, we went to foxglove, columbine, liriope, of course. They have higher temperatures. Some plants have higher temperature. They can do well at higher temperatures. They adapt. But one of the great plants in the shade that produces flowers, and very interesting, is acanthus. And it's one of the plants that, most people don't even think about, And I've been to gardens and I've planted acanthus. And they do need to look as good as possible. They need to have moisture retentive soil. And so if you have a moist area in the shade, they like that. Otherwise, they will somewhat in the middle of the day. And acanthus, bear's breeches is another name for them. They have a beautiful, large foliage, flower stalk in the middle of summer that gets around 2 to 3 feet and can create a high ground cover. And one beautiful, a beautiful one that I was just thinking, whitewater, and that's Acanthus spinosa, and heat resistant, and it's variegated, very, very white and green, and kind of a pink flower. So, when you're thinking about a shade garden, don't think about, Asiatic jasmine is my only choice. There's plenty of native plants. If you're a native person, we talked about Indian pinks as a great one. If you like fern, we have autumn brilliance, which is a Dryopteris fern, which is a native. And then we have we have Heuchera americana, which is a native plant in our area. And Juca is not, but it's a very easy plant to grow in our area. There's all different choices to make. And if you want a beautiful shade garden, there's plenty of things to choose from. Also when you're, planting in the garden, and we always talk about one of the most important things you could do. And you're not going to realize how much, most people don't realize how much it affects the overall presence of being in your paradise in the backyard or any type of landscape. Blocking the roof lines of the neighbor's house. The roof lines really interfere with the overall look of your garden. Tropical gardens, easy, plant a band line in there, and when you walk out into your own personal paradise in your backyard, you're not going to see roof lines. Hopefully you're not going to see telephone poles, wire. Everything is going to be surrounded, and it makes a huge difference every time I do that. And I was able to persuade the client into, covering those roof lines, or partitioning or thinning them out and making them not the predominant element in the view. They've always been super impressed and pleased with the overall result. But, bamboo may not be your cup of tea. And if it's not, there's plenty of other things. And when you're planting a larger hedge, you want it to grow somewhat faster. Because, if you're starting out a landscape, you don't want to wait 20 years for it to become a partition. Some of the great plants that you could plant as a partition. Well, there's that music again. This is the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. We'll be right back with you with more great gardens. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living. Whether it be making a shade garden and how to get the best out of your shade zones, make something interesting in your landscape, or partitioning and creating your own paradise. Paradise is a Persian word, ancient Persian word meaning walled garden. And to have a paradise, you need to have a wall, And so you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. If you're starting out on a project and you're unsure what to do, or how to get your grass green, or make great containers in this high temperature, high heat. I listen to the people up in New York complaining about they're having a heat, a lot of hot weather. I go, that's funny. I went, the Japanese garden in Oregon, and I thought I was standing in line. I forget where I was standing in line at, but the people were complaining about the high humidity. It was around 79. People have no idea. But we're talking about creating a great hedge in your landscape. Privacy is the first thing you need to do if you're building a landscape. Whether you have just grass and some very simple borders, that's great. A great look, as long as your grass is looking great, you have mowed, neat, and trimmed. That's a great look. And then, covering the roof line, your neighbor's not looking in there. We started on a project, with a larger, place, and we wanted to, we had the perennial garden. We started like 6,000 something perennials in it. But, as you're spending more time enjoying your perennial garden in the shade. We had to have a shade area where they could sit on. And, you start noticing the houses next door, the roof lines, the windows of other people looking in. And first step we did is cover the wooden fence in a shade zone with oak leaf hydrangeas called Alice. And those get really large, and they get around 12 feet when they're mature. And they've added to the landscape. We have the big 100-foot or something perennial bed, 25 feet wide, and then we added to the landscape by adding the color of the flowers of oak leaf hydrangea. And we blocked the neighbor fence, it's an old rickety old wooden fence, not the best condition. And we blocked their view of looking at their house. And so because these oak leaf hydrangeas get tall. And we planted Alice, which is a great cultivar, a type large growing oak leaf hydrangea, because we used Alice because it holds its leaves during the winter. They turn red, orange, yellow, and they have beautiful fall color. But the unique thing about Alice is it holds its leaves even though they're turning that fall color until it puts its new leaves on. Now the next thing is we want to reduce the amount of noise and block the roof line and the houses across the brick wall. We have a long brick wall. I think it's probably 150 feet long. And but we don't want to block the brick wall, but we want to block or partition some of that area so we're not looking in the across into the house. And some of the great so before I tell you what types you want to make if you're trying to select a plant or tree to block that, you want something that grows fast. So I set parameters between 3 to 5 feet a year. I need 3 to 5 feet a year. So I want this to be up and usable and not having to wait 10, 15 years. So we're planting a good sized tree, and something that will catch up. And some of the plants, when under ideal conditions, that will reach that criteria, that are very interesting and look great with a brick wall, is going to be our river bird. The area is somewhat wet, so that's moisture retentive. So river birch will grow well there. We want to back it a little bit further off the wall. River birch called Durhee or Heritage. Those are, and they have exfoliating bark, and they look great when they're younger. They still look good when they're older, but they'll get up in size fairly quickly. They are deciduous. That means they lose their leaves in the winter, but they have a lot of branching, so that does create a partition. And another one, if you have a big space and you have a lot of area to cover quick, is a sycamore called Exclaim. And you need this is a bigger tree. And you can grow grass under this one because it has a shade, it's a shade tree, but it doesn't create that opaque a live oak just blocks all the light density. It's not highly dense. It's branching its leaves, but Exclaim is a sycamore that will meet our general standard and can exceed that. It can exceed that somewhat. It's a fast-growing tree in the right condition. If you have a smaller area, the Little Volunteer is a good tree. A poplar, Arnold poplar. The Arnold poplar require a little bit more spacing because these trees are very vertical, but they're not wide. Okay, so they're only going to get around maybe 9 feet wide. So you can plant them in a line. But the Little Volunteer is going to be more of a pyramid shaped tree, and but stays contained not more than, let's say, 30 feet tall. A little slower on that one. That one we kind of went away from our planting guidelines. It'd be something that gets up there quick. And one tree that really gets neglected that grows well in our area is eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a evergreen. I mean, and they have fast growing eucalyptus. They have Angus, which is a high eucalyptus, kind of willow like. It's like a weeping willow, and I think they say they can grow in ideal conditions around 8 feet a year, and then it slows down. Only gets around 50 feet, but these trees will lurch forward when they're young, really grow fast, and they'll slow. Blue Moon is another one, but this one's a little small, but it's a fast grower. We'll get up to its size to around 15 to 20 feet, and fairly quickly, getting between 3 to 5 feet a year. They grow these trees for leaves. In California, they have eucalyptus farm, and they're a florist buy their cuttings of their leaves, and they put them in floral arrangements. So they have to be able to quickly produce leaves. And that's one of Luna is another one. It's a kind of a very wispy eucalyptus, and you can get these online. There's a place online, Southern Eucalyptus. They have all the cold variety and the cold tolerant varieties that will grow in our area. And let me see, most of them, I think they set the benchmark at around zero degrees Fahrenheit. And Luna is a great looking. A lot of times eucalyptus have round leaves. You see them in round leaves, and they have really beautiful trunks, on them. You want to kind of have a low branching one when you ask for a eucalyptus. If you're creating, depends on what you're trying to cover. We want ours a little bit higher branching because we want to see the brick wall. But if you have like a wooden fence, I would request, if you're ordering one, a low branching. That means they leave the branches on the tree until and they don't trim them up. So it's low branching. More, it has like if you leave a magnolia, if you plant a magnolia and you don't trim the branches, it will be full to the ground. But trim those up. You want to have low branching. Depends on what your criteria, what you're trying to cover. We want ours a little higher branch, and good preparation on the whole. When you're planting any tree, you want a maximum growth between 3 to 5 feet a year. So in 2 years, you got your tree 6 foot tall. You wanted a tree to be getting at least 20, 25 feet. That's a good size. Well, it starts really blocking the view, and then maybe 30 to 40. That's a good size you want to shoot for, 30 or 40 feet. That blocks, any type of wires, anything that could be obstructive, or distracting. So the eucalyptus is another one. Blue is another great tree. If you've got a small lower area, and you want a great partition. It's going to be a little slower growth. Is weeping bottle brush. We used on a location that we covered about 50 feet with weeping bottle brush, and they have a great head, and they flower profusely when they're well taken care of. They flower absolutely profusely, and they're pretty tolerant of moisture, over too much moisture. They were kind of planted in a little bit of a soggy area. When it rained, it got really wet, and then it dried out. Rain, so they're very tolerant of that. Make sure that you get one that got a strong leader. If you wanted the bottle brush to get 12 feet tall, you have to kind of brace up the leader as it goes up, because there's a tendency to weep over. Eventually, they'll get up that size, but if you want it to get tall quicker, then you want to brace up the leaf, pick out a branch and make that the leaf. A weeping bottle brush is the best bottle brush in our zone. Those other bottle brushes, they'll do okay. But the real true weeping one that looks like a weeping willow is the most vigorous, the most disease resistant, the most full of foliage, full of flower. The other varieties don't do that well in our zone. They're kind of threadbare. You can fertilize them and work on them, and they'll get them better looking. We have one when we're doing the maintenance on one property, it had this bottle brush there already exist. So we left it alone, and we fertilized it and worked on it and tried to make it look better. But the weeping type are the absolute best varieties to plant. And if you want something to substitute for weeping willow, and more resistant to the heat, that would be a tree. If you like a weeping tree, well, that would be a great one. Another substitute, if you want to have something like a weeping tree that's really resistant to the heat. Weeping yaupon too. They have beautiful berries. They have pollen. There's a great tree for the pollinator. Weeping yaupon, though it's slow. That one's slow. The bottle brush is going to be slow growth tree. We went down and got us some great palm trees in Homestead, my favorite place to go. I love to go down there. But we have got some great cycads, Woodsonia, which is very cold tolerant. We have a whole collection of cycads. And those cycads are like sagos. And sagos is just one small group, our sago palm. And they're not actually palms, but one of the ones we bought this time, villanosa, which now this is a great cycad if you have a pool and you really want fountain foliage out of there's that music. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. We'll be right back with more great garden. Welcome back to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and discovering more great garden ideas, projects. If you're starting out on a project and you're, whether it be a poolscape or a Japanese garden or a tropical garden, we're experts in creating themed gardens and or creating any type of eclectic style. And we even have the regular guy garden. We'll throw in some weeds and leafless shrubs. You want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. My persimmon, oh my gosh, is loaded with fruit. Can't wait on that. And the watermelon are growing at a great rate. They love this heat. They love good soil, and they are growing. The lemon tree. When lemons got to be $1 a piece, I said I'm getting a lemon tree, and it's doing great. But the persimmons, I love the persimmons. Simple, tough trees. A pool side. We're planting. We went down south, got some palm trees, bromeliads, the sort of stuff we get for landscape. But we got one of these great looking cycads. It's in the cycad family, but it's Encephalitis villanosa, scientific names. It's one of the great things about this plant, and you should, if you have poolside garden and you don't want to walk, you could plant these cycads. They grow well in containers. They create the fountain look. Some have trunks Some will develop like a small palm tree in a trunk, which is great, to have a dramatic look to it. Or some create those fountain like foliage, vase shape, and they don't have really a trunk. The caudalex is the head of the flower part the leaf comes out of it, but they stay low. They're only going to get 6 to 8 inches tall, maybe a foot tall, and the foliage comes out. And the foliage is going to some of the foliage on some of the is going to be 6 to 8, and they're going to be vase shaped upright. And once you put that in your container, you'll need a large container, and you can just say water it a couple times, maybe a little bit of fertilizer, and then it's on its own. They're they grow in tropical areas, but this one villanosa can take it down into the low 20s. It may have its leaves burned off in the low 20s, let's say 22, 23, but it will flush right back. We've really tried a lot of cycads in our area, and some of them, in fact, do have their leaves burned off. You think, oh, it's. But we thought Zamia, which is another cycad, which is very low growing, again, a small low growing caudalex, and then it has a beautiful foliage. And, but we thought 20 degrees it was gone, but it was gone. But it did lose every leaf, but it popped right back out. They're going to be a little bit on the expensive side if you want to get a large one. Yeah, you can make sure that you trust that they'll come if they get damaged. But always make sure that you're not buying one of the ones that is going to be really cold sensitive. So you'll have a better looking garden, a better start in the spring. But cycads and Cephalardus, Zamni, all of these make great poolside gardens, and you don't have to ever water them. Once established, we planted some dahoo in containers in the front and right at the entrance, and they look spectacular. That's another variety of cycad. We've never watered them. We watered them maybe 4 or 5 times just to get them good in there in the soil, and after that, we haven't done nothing to them. Through the winter, they were perfect. Through the summer, they look perfect. They love that condition, and if we want them to speed up a little bit of growth, we'll put some fertilizer on them. All you have to do, basically, if you have, maybe put a little bit of trace elements on it in the spring, and a little bit of nitroform, urea formaldehyde, which lasts for about 90 days or some release fertilizer on it, and that's you're not gonna. And if you don't want to do that, don't do that. You just won't You're not gonna get A results, but you're gonna get C and B results. So they're a tropical plant that will produce and look for decades. And when it gets large, if you want to, you always sell it. Those plants are valuable. Woodsonia, a large Woodsonia, they're worth in the thousands, a large one. There would be around 15, 20 years old, expensive. They're not cheap when they get old. So if you move, you can put it on Facebook, always be able to get a price on those. As your containers move through the summer, they need a little bit of, and you can recharge them. The soil needs to be recharged. And what I do to recharge my annual containers, get a second wind out of them, get another flush of blue, is I add a little bit of seaweed, I add a little bit of fish emulsion, and a little bit of nitroform. And that nitroform will start breaking down. And it's a very long-lasting fertilizer. So, you put Miracle-Gro in. The Miracle-Gro is gone within a week, if you're watering every day. It's leached out. It's very, very solid. And so you want to put something, especially in this high, like that will last. You can use sulfur-coated fertilizer, slow release. Nitroform is 100% of slow release. It's 3900. We use in the plants that we don't want to have to fertilize again. If you got you're fertilizing, you want to put something in there that'll last a long time. Nitroform, and nitroform, is a great fertilizer. They've shown through scientific research on your grass, it does amazing things. That the highest density of roots, highest biomass formed on a plant is the plants that are fertilized with nitroform, because it's 100% insoluble. And what happens is the bacteria work on that fertilizer, digest that fertilizer, and then release. And so that fertilizer is not considered to be, it is in form a inorganic fertilizer. What happens when it gets digested by the bacteria, it becomes an organic fertilizer, which is much better for the plant. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. We'll be right back with more great garden. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we're talking about outdoor living, whether it be your pond, your pergola, how to have a great poolside garden, what plants can you plant one time, and they're going to, keep on going. And, out there it's getting warm, great, stay hydrated. And if you're going to get some great water, you need to call the people out of your own drink, at your own home, the great people at Affordable Water. And they're experts on water. They've been in business decades and decades. Whether it be a water softener, drinking water, or getting your well water to taste a little better, they'll be able to do it for, you hear about these drinking water things now that they're not what they're supposed to be, what they proclaim. Why not have it in your own? You want to give them a call, 904-262-0197. It's amazing. I keep reading these articles, on the news feed about drinking water, the expense, and also they're doing these tests. People are testing, and wait a minute. Affordable Water, they'll come out and test your water. 904-262-0197. Affordable. We're talking about what to do with your containers. Talking about long-lasting plants. We're just side, but we planted zinnia. If you plants of a poolside garden and last a long time, and zinnias, we planted zinnia seeds in this poolside garden, which we do the maintenance. And 3 years ago or 4 years, and they come up every year. They drop their seeds. They come up every year. We do absolutely nothing. They come up. We just thin them out. We just say, okay, we want one here, want one there. Then we take out the rest. But that's a great plant to plant in any container that you want to take care of itself. They come up every. They can take the heat. They can take the humidity. Come in many different sizes, whether it be 24 inches tall or be 3 feet tall, and then produce flowers all season long. When one flower dries out, we just take the flower and the seed heads and just spread them everywhere and let Mother Nature take care of it. So very, very simple. But in containers right now, getting them reboosted for long run of the summer, July, August, and September. Then we'll start cooling down in September, and you just want them to, be healthy through the and producing flowers, healthy through the nitroform, fish emulsion, a little bit of seaweed. You can put a little molasses and inoculant on there, and then they're good for the rest of the year. Some of the plants that really love this heat. Of course, we talked about cycads, sagos. Pent will flower all summer long. Once you can get them any time of the year, plant them, get them watered. They're going to need more water. They're lantana. When you're planting containers, you should, if you really like the water as much, you always should look for plants that really could take it more on the drought side. Just like when we're planting we're planting some big palm trees. And we're talking about 15, 18 feet tall in container by pools. And if you like that look, and we think a couple other ones we were playing, some Phoenix, and then also some. But you try to pick out palms or plants that can take a little bit of drought. You don't want palms, or if you're planting a large palm, it wants a lot of water because they're going to dry out a little bit during the season. So making a careful selection. A bougainvillea, they love being planted in containers because they love cramped roots. They actually thrive when they're in containers. The bougainvillea is one of the best plants to plant in containers, and will flower And when it droughts, it stimulates it to bloom again. That's why you go to Mexico, you'll see these great bougainvilleas, California, because they're droughty. They go through these droughts, and that really stimulates them to bloom. They really are stimulated to bloom with drought. If I have a bougainvillea in a container and we've had a lot of rainfall and I want it to flower, I just lay it over on side so it doesn't get any rain. I let every single leaf drop off, every single leaf, and then I stand it back up, water, put some fertilizer, boom, foliage is out, it's blooming, and that's how I stimulate it. It's a little harder when they're in the ground, but in a container, a large container, you can have a great bougainvillea in the ground. Also, you have guara, which is a very, very drought resistant and very floriferous, wispy kind of grass. Any type of miscanthus can grow in a container. Any grasses will look great in container. The purple fountain grass is another great plant that looks great in container. Yuccas, copper leaf. If you have a tropical garden, you want great colorful leaves. Robust plant. Copper leaf plant is they come in all different colors: purples, reds, orange, pink, green, yellows. They just a great looking tropical plant. Regardless if it has flowers, its flowers are nondescript, but the leaves is what make the plant really look good. If you could put them in a position where they get some, maybe 3 or 4 hours of shade, the colors become more distinct. They really stand out more. When they get in full, that 14 hours, sometimes the colors run together and they're not delineation between the dark red and the light. The canna lily likes a little bit more moisture, but they're surprisingly drought tolerant along a poolside. If you want a vegetable fruit, in your pool, pineapple is a great and grows well in a container. If we have an extreme cold, will need some protection. Eggplant is very simple in a container. We grew eggplants in containers for 2 years and no problem. An eggplant is actually a semi-hardy shrub. And actually, they are not really an annual. They are an annual in our zone because of some cold. But when we have mild winters, we're saying around down to 29 degrees, 28. They'll survive in a somewhat protected area, and then they'll go back to when they're fertilized, and they're fertilized correctly. And growing an eggplant, one eggplant can produce 2 or 3 eggplants a week. Once a plant get them flowering, and then they'll just go into production, and you can get when ideal conditions, that will produce a plenty of eggplant for you all season. They have all different kinds of sizes and shapes. We planted a multitude of different sizes, but when they finally bit the dust when it was in last winter, very, very, and Katherine asked me, should I bring them in? I said, no, it's sink or swim. We're not dragging in the plants in and out. They're going to thrive this time of the year, and we got various, and you can start them from seed, very simple. Go online, get you a rare seed as a source for them. There's all different varieties. And do I think you should buy a pepper plant as a start? I don't think you should. You could buy for $3. You can get plenty of, and they're so simple that you really don't need to start with a plant. Not unless you like to. A little easier. But you can 5 or 10 plants out of a pack of seed. And that goes for basil too. Basil's very, very easy to start from seed if you're in a container. They're very, very, once you get them going, very, very drought resistant. They can miss a couple days of water. They may, but basil, at $5, a little bag of basil, Publix is like $5. That's, you can get all the basil you want out of 2 containers. There's just they have, whether it be lettuce leaf, they have lettuce leaf basil, or Thai sweet. There's plenty of varieties. We not last year, but the year before, we tried. I mean, at least 15 different varieties of basil, and there were so much basil we didn't know what to do with it. Another great plant to grow in a container and also makes a great topiary is rosemary. And rosemary, they have some beautiful flowers, and they can be trimmed. They don't like to be hard in the summer, but if you want to shape them, change the shape. They need to be done in the winter. That needs to be done in the winter. They don't like severe trimming. That goes for any juniper that you're thinking about trimming this time of the year. You want to very lightly trim those. They do not like hard trim during the light trimming, to collect the spices or the not a problem. Really cutting them deep, they won't. They may die from it. That's how much they don't like it. Lavender, very easy. If you like the traditional garden, lavender easy in a container. Likes it to droughts, can take some drought, and beautiful flowers in the spring. Cut back, and then you may have some rebloom on some of the varieties in the fall when it cools. For more kind of a dry garden look, golden sword. Yeah, these are all now. Golden sword is kind of a more of a, if you want a dry garden, arid type looking plant, but it does produce a flower. So it does produce a beautiful flower stalk, and golden sword does have a yellow and green nut. And once you put that into your container, you can forget about it. Does it ever need watering? Never. It never needs watering. Rosemary, you can put in the container, and it needs watering maybe twice a week, once a week, just to on how much rainfall we're getting. But there's foreseen that if we have decent rainfall, that you'd never have to water that or lavender. It's just really, if you have a large enough another great vegetable that you want to grow vegetables is dwarf okra. That will grow in that okra loves the heat of the summer. Bulletproof. You don't have to worry. Whether it's going to take the 100-degree heat or 90-degree heat. As long as you're putting water on it, you're going to have to put water on your vegetables, or if you're growing them, and some are more tolerant. But the key is when you're growing vegetables or fruit in a container, whether it be citrus or anything else, do not want to dry. That stress really does set them back on production. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we'll be right back with you more great garden. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your pond, your pergola, how to create a nice poolside garden, or to recharging your containers for the next bit of. Boy, I will tell you, we were working at poolside garden. We would have container bromeliads, and these are the large bromeliads, silvery looking leaf. Odorata is Alcantara, is a great looking bromeliad. And one of them is flowering right now, really silver leaves, and it's 2.5 feet tall and around 3 feet in diameter. And its flower stalk is 6 foot. I mean, it looks like something out of Jurassic Park. It just has the beautiful yellow flowers straight up, very similar to the same structure as the century. As a matter of fact, if you like to have a California style garden, every time people come back from California, my clients come back, they say, oh, they're always amazed by, how nice the landscape is in California. And that would be one of the plants you want to plant. This particular one, Odorata, Alcantaras, are pretty cold resistant. They create that California look. And then some of the other plants I would mix with that is, of course, I'd plant an olive. Olive trees they're everywhere you go. I mean, when I was a small boy, we had olive trees everywhere. They were street side planting, cleaning up every year after olive trees, or the stains on the sidewalk, getting all the olives off the ground. There was everywhere. We were throwing them at you. But that is a great tree they give you that silver, using gray gravel, maybe as your chop, decomposed agave mediopicta would be a great, and that's a beautiful agave. I mean, Medio picta is a really exceptional look. White leaves in the center and green. And of course, a barrel cactus if you want California dry garden California. As far as the flowering plants, you could put in neptia. That's a beautiful flowering plant. Doesn't once it's planted and established, forget about the irrigation. Nepta Walker is another one. Agapanthus are going to be included in every single California garden. They love agapanthus out there. Of course, we in the lower south, and we're waiting for I'm waiting on our 6-foot flower stalk agapantha. I forgot the cultivar of it, but it produced a flower 6 foot. I'm in hot pursuit of trying to get the largest agapantha flower, trying to get the bulb. I'm trying to get it. I can't. They grow a lot of them in Australia, but the flower stalk is at least 5 foot, and the flower head on it is at least 10 to 12 inches. It's big. It's depend on the growing condition. And one great plants that you can plant, I have no idea. No people plant them forming linoatum. A very, it's kind of a grassy grama. I think when they have grassy like grama foliage, it's not actually a grass, but it has a broad. It's around at the base. You're talking 1.5 inches wide. Great color. They come in different colors. There's the one I have, linoatum, as green and yellow, but it creates this beautiful and a beautiful flower. And you'll see them. This one here is very tolerant of our high temperature and high humidity. A lot of times they're tolerant of the high humidity and high temperature. You always look before you plant them. But this one I know for sure. We planted it and it flowers beautiful. And red yucca, if you want to create poolside or that California style garden with low water requirements are definitely in California. They're shutting off your water there. Red yucca it's not really a yucca. It's kind of a grassy looking, succulent looking, and beautiful orange or yellow flower. And this is another great container plant. Pools, put it in there. And how often do you have to water it? Never have to be watered. It's originally a native of the South and Mexico area. Beautiful flowers and ornamental seed. Happy 4th of July. Great spend some time with you. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. We'll be with you next week.